Welcome everybody. Welcome to Cara and Vineyard show, second day of grape session. I hope you are enjoying beautiful winter days. So I would like to say thank you to our generous sponsors. They help us a lot to make everything possible. So I would like to say thank you and express my deepest appreciation on them. And also, I would like to remind that Michigan State University is providing equal opportunity for everybody, regardless of their differences. I'm sure everybody know how to use Zoom, but I would like to remind that if you have any question, please use Q&A box. You can simply type your question and send it to us. Or if you have any comments, please use chat box. If you have any issue with audio setting, make sure you are choosing the right speaker. These are our amazing collaborators. They help us a lot to make this show possible. We start from September, so it was a long process to prepare everything for this 2-3 days event. Today we have two speakers, Dr. Dennis Phillips from Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Dr. Cara Robinson from Department of Animal Science. They are going to present a very interesting computer application to support and increase the sustainability for grape and wine production. Doctor, we are all ears.
So Cara's going to do the first part of the talk, and then I'm going to finish with where we're going in the future with this application.
So good morning. And so for those of you who were up in Traverse City last year, you saw Dr. Karen Chow and I present the initial portion of this project. And so just to this is a update to try and go forward and tell you where we were and then where we are moving in the future. So how did this project begin? So Karen Chow started this project. This is really her project, and Dennis and I came on, at various times later on. But the Michigan Sustainable Wine Grape Program funded this as part of this project to assess risk for pesticide use on workers in the state of Michigan. And it was supported by the Michigan Wine Collaborative, and we had a proposal. And the initial proposal started with a specific number of products, both pesticides and herbicides, and just to see if we could assess the risk of those pesticides to the workers using them. And then we expanded out a little bit and started to produce a user interface for the grape growers to be able to access this information and use it on their fields. And so last year we demonstrated the start of a user interface. And so now we're going to talk a little bit more about where we are headed in this next year. So what we did was, as part of this, the biggest part was to derive an acute toxicity risk index. And so there's a lot that goes into this, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some heavy scientific details and the algorithms used to develop all of this. But basically, we look at the size of your vineyard or the size of the area that you're going to be spraying on. You may not spray the entire vineyard at once. You may spray just pieces. what task the employee is doing, if they're mixing and loading the sprayer or if they're actively spraying, or maybe the same employee is doing all of the jobs. What types of PPE are required by the product that you are using? And then how is that product formulated? Some of it comes as a dry flowable, as a granule. Some of it has a water-soluble packaging. And then what type of tractor are you using and what kind of sprayer are you using? Because the tractor is going to, and the sprayers are both going to play a role in how much exposure the person on the tractor will receive while doing the task. And then we're looking at both dermal toxicity and inhalation. And for the oral, that would be more along the lines of what is actually getting to the consumer. But for the workers, we're really concerned with dermal and inhalation toxicities because those will occur during the task of spraying. And so we take into account all of these variables over here and the relative toxicities, and then create an acute risk index. And that will allow us to rank those products from least toxic to most toxic to the worker based on what they're doing. So at an acute level, this would be one incident. So each time a person was to use this product, what is their risk? And then we can also look at the same thing from a chronic toxicity level. And the chronic toxicity is basically the same pattern and the same things. We're just using a different set of values. And this would be chronic, would be over time. So over years of use of this product, how dangerous is it? Some products are very dangerous on a one-time use scale, and some products build up their toxicity over time so that their individual use one time in 1 year may not be very high, but every day for an entire year, you may see a very different level of toxicity reached. So we're able to assess both acute and chronic. So in order to have kind of a background data set to be able to pull this information from, we created risk scenarios, and we created 930 possible scenarios. And so this is using two types of tractors, open cab and closed cab, and then three types of sprayers, an air blast, a ground boom, and a solid broadcast. Employee tasks either being the mixer, loader, or the sprayer. And then also the required PPE based on the product that you select, and the acreage of the area that you specify that you're spraying, and formulation and packaging. And so all of these combinations, there's 930 possibilities. And this was just a good starting point for us to be able to test and make sure that all the math was working well in the database, and that everything was coming out, the numbers were all matching. We were able to prove that we validate the numbers if we do them in Excel or on paper versus doing them in the database. And so we can add more scenarios if there are other types of tractors or types of sprayers that are commonly used in the industry. We can always increase this number of scenarios. Each scenario includes a total amount of toxicity based on both the dermal and inhalation that would be achieved during the event. So having these scenarios allows us to be able to compare between products. So if we want to say, if we're looking at Great Berry Moth, for example, and we want to say which products are very good for this, we can pull up a list of products that work well, and then we could rank them from least toxic to most toxic. And we can look at both the acute and the chronic numbers for those, and they will all be based on the same scenario that is chosen. So will be a very similar comparison. And this will also account if we've accounted for the fact if, say, a product has 2 active ingredients, we're totaling up the toxicity for both of those active ingredients within the product to create a product total. So we've tried to account for everything that we can when developing this risk index. And so moving forward, what we're trying to do is design a secure mobile app to be able to help you as a grape grower and winemaker to be able to utilize this information in a much more concise and easy way. And so what we're kind of thinking is, and Dennis will talk a little bit more about this later on, but we want to be able to allow you to choose the product that you would like to use, and then see the information about that product. FRAC codes, what categories it's in, what active ingredients are there, if it has any environmental concerns, and then also be able to select that product to create a task, choose a field or an area to spray that on. And then we also wanted to be able to assess somehow the potential for pesticide drift and overspraying by knowing weather conditions and the area in which it was sprayed on. And then we're also trying to be able to incorporate some reporting efforts into this mobile device as well, so that it could automatically generate some usage reports that would comply with the MDAR and the USDA filing. So some of the key features, and some of this we showed a little bit last year, and some of it has been updated. So we want to be able to geotag both the vineyards and the fields or the sub areas within that vineyard. And please forgive the fact that we just filled in holes here, and that, yes, it does say just white and red for variety, and that, you know, I know that there's better varieties than white and red, but just to fill in the holes so that you could kind of see what we're trying to here with allowing you to create a bunch of field IDs or area IDs within your vineyard, designate approximately how many acres those each are, because that acreage on that area would come back and be used in the calculation for exposure for that spraying area. And then just some information about that background information. And then we would also have a map. So eventually there'll be a map here that comes up and allows you to use like Google Maps to geotag the corners of your areas to get the lat longs of those corners so that we know exactly the correct field size. And so then you could also report actions taken by the vineyard workers. So if you created a task for this field East 1 and said, I want you to spray Procure on this field at this certain date, then when they go in, you could see the date that the worker actually completed the task and the time, and then allow also, once they start to spray, to collect weather data and have the weather data recorded within here so that you could go back and look at a later time to say, okay, what was the wind speed? What was the wind direction? And then this would potentially allow us to be able to calculate some pesticide drift information at a later time. And so how would we expect you to be using this? So for the vineyard, for the manager side, we would expect more of a web app where you would access this through a web browser on a computer or a tablet, to be able to choose the product that you'd like to use, schedule a spraying task. If you want to use the standard pounds per acre that is designated by the product label, then that would automatically fill in here in the pounds per acre. If you want to make comments about what the problem is that you're treating or why that you're spraying for this specific event. And if you're making all of your spraying schedules far in advance, you could also request the app to send you an email reminder a few days before, just so that you could remember that you scheduled that task. And then also be able to generate those environmental impact reports. And so that would be on the manager side. And then for the worker side, that app would be more of a mobile app that would be able to pull up on your phone. and they would be able to see the spraying tasks that were assigned to that individual. And then they would be the ones that would record the completion of the task, the weather conditions, spraying time, and path traveled. So when they would go to start spraying, they could click the button that says start recording, and then we'll use geotagging and some Google and the GPS in the phone to create a path traveled, more like a map. And that map would be viewable later on the completion part of this details by the managers, so that they could assure that the employee did in fact travel the route that they had envisioned when they created the spraying task. And so just for your information, this is just kind of a very small checklist to show you that we are, so the top titles here on the columns are what our data that we're collecting: month, date, year, time, area treated in acres, application rate. And so these items are already in the database. And so the USDA requires, the requirements for the USDA forms have X's on them, and the MDAR R635 requirement had the items here are also listed. And so we just wanted to show you this small table to demonstrate that we are collecting currently the data that you will need for these types of forms. And we could, if there's some other information that was required, we could also add that to collect that data as well. But currently, this is what we are collecting within the database as it stands at the moment. And so as some of the discussions that we've had, and then some feedback from last year at the conference, and also at the Southwest conference that we presented at last February, some of the feedback was also that maybe this would be helpful for some researchers and entomologists to also be able to have access to some of this, maybe to track the spread of disease and insect infestations. So not to use specific farm information, but if there's something that's spreading across the top of Michigan, maybe the researchers want to be able to use some of this information for long-term tracking of how the disease moves across the state, or what weather conditions increase the spread of, say, downy mildew, and the directionality in which it's going in certain years. And also the effectiveness of chemicals. So if the reporting, there's some notes taken by individuals, then researchers may be able to use some of this data later on to do some long-term efficacy studies. And we also thought that it might be nice to have a login for entomologists if they wanted to have a photo area where they could, either the farm employees could take pictures of insects on the vines, and then it uploads, the entomologists could see those. They would be geotagged with the location, date, time, and notes. So in the future, they might be able to look at emergence of insects and different stages of those insects. And they would just be geotagged, so they wouldn't be specific to any one farm, just to the area in which that they were found. And these types of information wouldn't be broadcast to the public.
So where are we at? Well, Cara has developed an initial prototype using FileMaker Pro. And the primary purpose of that was just to evaluate the whole pesticide risk assessment methodology. Validate the scenarios, making sure these calculations were rating these different products appropriately in terms of risk. So, FileMaker Pro. I had used FileMaker Pro maybe 30, 40 years ago, but, really hadn't used it very much. And, really that's, pretty typical in some of the issues that's, related to this prototype. One is that, if you're going to use FileMaker Pro and make an application developed in it available to, say all the grape growers in the state of Michigan, not only do you have the fees associated with hosting the application on the server, but in addition, you have licensing fees from Claris Corporation that makes FileMaker, and some of those fees, they're annual and they're pretty high. So and those fees are based on per user, per simultaneous user. So if 10 wine growers would want to use this application at the same time, we would have to have enough user licenses for 10 users. The other issue is having to do with scalability. It's really difficult to extend and potentially add new features to a FileMaker Pro application. Part of that, also relates into the maintainability. FileMaker Pro expertise is really not widely available. So, what we're trying to do in our next steps in the actual production version is to address some of these drawbacks or issues with the prototype. So what we're doing is we're moving the entire application to open source software. So, a Debian Linux server running Apache, MySQL database, so that there are no, licensing costs associated with using this. You still have, potential hosting costs, but you're not, if you will, double billed for licensing of, the software itself. In addition, to access some of the features, for example, the GPS for location tracking, you need to have a native mobile application. You really need to be able to access the GPS hardware that's located on your smart devices. So that's the direction that we're moving. So what kind of time frame are we talking about here? Well, one of the nice things is that in the computer science department, for our senior students, one of the required courses that they have to take is something called a capstone course. And in this course, teams of students work with companies like Facebook, Mozilla, Lockheed Martin, GM, insurance companies to work on projects and, in fact, develop applications for them. In fact, for example, this year, one of the teams is working on a project for Mozilla, the company that does, the Firefox browser. And when they're done, their code is actually going to be part of the code base for the Firefox browser. We were fortunate enough that this project was selected as one of the projects for this coming semester to actually take our prototype and move it over to a web application and corresponding mobile application. So we met with the development team just this past few days. We're going to be having weekly meetings over the next 4 months, and we expect to have an initial production version during this spring semester at Michigan State, so over the next 4 months. So that's where we are going forward. So, one of the things we want to do is, who is the team, and really thank all the support that we've gotten from the various MSU contributors, the Michigan grape and wine industry contributors, and all the previous people that have helped us in the past. So, thank you to all of you for your support that you've given us over the past couple of years, and support that we hope that you'll give us in the future. So, at this point, we're, open for, discussion and questions. In the past, we know there's been questions concerning, data security. In this application, this will be a secured application in that, so, for a farm manager, when they sign into this system, they will only be able to see information related to their farm or vineyard. When workers sign in, again, they will only be able to see tasks that are assigned to them and that are, related to the particular farm that or vineyard that they're associated with. So Cara mentioned earlier, we have these 900 and some scenarios. Are there other scenarios that you would like to have? What kind of email notifications and sending of data would you like? We're planning on providing, reports that match the required forms from MDAR and the U.S. Department of Agriculture for your record keeping, reporting purposes. So, we don't know those, but, are there any other forms, reports that you would like to see from the application? And also, mobile devices, we got the whole Android, iPhone, people have, different preferences. Is there any, do you have a preference over, Android versus iPhone? In addition to the application, that will be available through, a web browser on either a desktop or a tablet. So, for the web part that's being viewed on a tablet, it will automatically support both an Android tablet or an iPad, say, for example. So with that, open it up to questions.
Thank you, Dennis and Cara. That's a wonderful presentation. We do have a few questions for you. Tom Petzold, which is actually one of your contributors on your list, he says, excellent progress on this project so far. Thank you. How far off would be risk assessment info, pardon me. How far off would be risk assessment info to be calculated on environmental risks like soil, vine, water, beneficial insects, animals, or birds?
So depending on the product, some of the products have this information already compiled into the database. We have not currently used it, but we have compiled it by going through, varieties of EPA documents or published papers or chemical reports from other universities on these types of products. Some of the products have more information out there than others do, but we started with beneficial insects, animals, and birds, and we haven't really conquered soil, vine, and water yet, but the products that do have those beneficial insects and birds, there is a portion on there where you can see them in the app at the moment, but you couldn't, you just see what was affected by the product, not calculate the risk to the animal. But we can work on that.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Nice app, but why could this not be used by orchards as well?
Absolutely no reason at all it couldn't. In fact, there's nothing in the database that will limit it to just grapes and vineyards at all. The only thing is, if there were different products that are used in the different fruit industries, we would need to gather that information, put them into the database. Are there different diseases, insects that, if you will, attack the other types of fruits? We would have to, add that information to the database. But other than that, there's no reason it couldn't be used. In fact, we'd like it to be used.
Excellent.
More use, the merrier.
Agreed. Is there not similar software available from chemical companies?
So I will take this one. And so this has come up quite a bit, I think. And so I know that Karen Chow looked into quite a bit of this types of information. And so yes, the chemical companies do provide the information that is on their product. They provide information associated with potentially harmful use of the product, but they don't actually look at the scenario in which you will be using it. So that is the big difference. And so if you have an open cab tractor and you are sitting on the tractor, the amount of that spray that you inhale while driving the tractor is affecting the person driving the tractor. And the chemical companies aren't estimating that risk. And so part of what Karen developed with her algorithms is taking into account that actual risk of use in the specific scenario in which we're using it in, and not just saying, if you drink some of this, you might die. And so I think that that's kind of the difference in where we're at here, is that we're really trying to be as much realistic in how it's actually being used, so that, the toxicity risk is as accurate as possible for that specific use.
Makes sense. Thank you. The next is a comment. Melanie says, I like the potential other uses such as geotagging and disease tracking. That's quite handy. Another question. Are there similar mobile data collection apps in use in other viticultural areas in the US, like lessons learned, best practices applied or considered?
Tom, I don't know. I looked into it a little bit, but Karen might have a better idea of what's available from other areas, but I'm not incredibly familiar with what else is being used. We tried to do some searches, but it's possible that they aren't publicly available apps. But if anybody does know of other apps used by other groups, it would be very handy to know what they are so we could look at them.
Okay. What sort of reporting practices are planned regarding the USDA, et cetera?
Well, Karen has gathered some Excel templates related to both USDA reporting forms as well as the MDAR forms. So there's one, I know for each, there's one that is related to reporting a pesticide usage at the vineyard, farm level. There was also one where you are required to report by individual their exposures. So this is where in this application, by having the spraying tasks and assigning them to an individual, it allows us to have all the information that's needed for reporting exposure by individual to the various products. So other than the ability to generate those required reports, to either keep them in your files, or if you're required to then send them into one of the reporting agencies, you would need to generate the report for a specific time period and handle submitting that to the various agencies.
Okay, thank you. We have about 8 to 10 minutes left to wrap up some questions, but if anyone has any, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. The next question is, do you have any funding support from USDA and RCS at this point?
I don't believe we do, although I know Karen has been looking into some other funding options.
Okay. The next question. I thoroughly recognize the importance of the disease and insect tracking features for researchers. It seems like those are more theoretical aspects at this point, though. How would tracking those features onto this app affect the current development timeline?
You're correct. They are, as you gathered, yeah, they are more theoretical, and those will be added in, say, version 1.5 or version 2 of the production app. So our main focus is the current set of features that support the vineyards, the grape growers or the fruit growers themselves.
Okay, thank you. Is the risk assessment for tractors with a cab include a HEPA filter?
At the moment, it does not, because the data sheet we are working off of from, I believe it's the EPA, that designates certain types of exposure numbers, does not specify a tractor with a cab and a HEPA filter, but and I would have to talk to Karen to see how we would incorporate that. But I will let you know that if the tractor has a cab, the exposure risk for inhalation is already extraordinarily low.
Okay, thank you. This is our last question, unless anyone else would like to type a question in. Will this be scalable to scouting and sharing field and location data?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Do you, Cara?
No. Could you add some more details?
Pat, if you're still on the call, if you want to type in some more details, that would be helpful. But yeah, I can read what he wrote again, or she, pardon me. Will this be scalable to scouting and sharing field and location data?
And it maybe we can open her microphone. She can ask or explain better.
Excellent idea. One moment. Ariane, Pat, would you like to ask your question live? Oh, disease and insect pressure. Will this be scalable to scouting and sharing field and location data? Disease and insect pressure.
Pat, do you mean, here I'm, the farm manager at Mari, let's say up on, Mission Point, and know that, would I be able to see the fact that maybe some vineyards to the north of me are seeing these diseases and want to prepare for them? Is that what you're asking?
I'm not sure. I've asked Pat to unmute, but I'm not sure.
Yes,
okay. I'm sorry.
Well, then we get into, some of the security and sharing. You might not want to share that information. That's something that we would have to think about. The data is there, and it just depends on how the farm managers want to share their information with other vineyards or farms. Like I said, the data is there. It's just, how we will go about allowing a farm manager to share the information. And what information to share.
Okay, thank you. And that was what they were asking. Another question. Does the WPS still require HEPA filters via mass for tractor operators? And if yes, could you use this data to change the requirement in cab respirator use?
So at the moment, the way the scenarios are working in the database is that whatever the product requirements are for use, if the product requires a single layer of gloves or a double layer of gloves or a respirator, that's what's going to ping in the system, right? So if we wanted to be able to change those, we would have to allow for a manager level override to alter. Let's say if the product says you don't need a respirator, but you would want to wear a respirator, then you would have to be able to override that in the system so that it chooses one with a respirator. Otherwise, it's just going to pull the initial information from what the base requirements are for the use of that product. And hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. More of a comment. Matt says, bravo, this app sounds tremendous. Thank you and your whole team for your efforts. I think that's our last question. Last call for questions, anyone?
I do have a question. Thank you for the nice presentation. I was thinking if grower they use this application, we will get, you will have a lot of information and very strong database. Is it possible for MSU researcher to access to this database? For example, to monitor what's going on in the state and which pesticide is common or which pest is in which area is, causing some problem. So just for research purpose, is it possible to have access to this database or not?
Yeah, that was one of the, if you will, future usage scenarios that we've thought of. Like you said, this could be, a tremendous resource to researchers, to the extension service, tracking diseases and maybe sending out, notices, hey, be on the lookout for this, it's headed your way type thing. So yes, that is one of the future uses that we'll be expanding this to include.
Thank you. I think we can take this one last question. We have to wrap up in like 2 minutes. If anyone has questions after this, we can just answer them via email. So the question, given the accumulation of data here about orchard, vineyard, farm spraying activities, would it be possible to make information available to beekeepers about what pesticides are in use in their area on a gross or larger scale use?
Go ahead, Cara.
I don't see why not. I would guess this would kind of fall into the research and extension kind of use of the database where we're not specifically giving out specific information. We hadn't really thought about bees. But I think once we started to gather enough data, I guess it would just depend on how everybody else feels about the use of the sharing, I guess. I don't, I mean, the data will be there.
Yeah, it would, I think, those individuals that are, researching the, if you will, the collapse of the, honeybees, around, not just in Michigan, but around the country, that having access to this information could be quite valuable.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions.
Bees.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Phillips, Dr. Robinson. It was great presentation, and I believe this application will increase sustainability in our orchard and vineyard. old state. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing us to present at the conference.
Of course. Thank
Yes.
you so much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you.